Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod to talk about MSU's return to the Breslin Center for a game against the Florida Atlantic Owls. First, a quick word of thanks to Michael Yoakum for his kind gift to the show. Thanks a lot, Mike, for your support. And for all those who support the show on a recurring basis, like Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level, Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, and Mike Huntoon. Draymond Green supporters, Adam Wolzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Doug Robinson, Dan O'Dranak, and now Joe Hollis, and all the Scott Skiles supporters, as well as Rich Wagenheim and Kenneth Cremett on Substack. So if you want to support the show, please head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the links to find ways to support it. All right, let's talk about these Owls who are presenting an interesting challenge for Michigan State. There's certainly no tomato can like we sometimes see during the non-conference. The Owls, as you can see, are 7-5 for the year, 0-0 on the conference. They're under first-year coach John Jacobs because he had replaced Jesse May, who ended up going to Michigan. Jacobs was the director of basketball operations at Gonzaga. He's an assistant for 7 years under Scott Drew at Baylor. And so he's been very successful, at least in successful programs. And so far, they're doing pretty well this year. They've got a 3-game winning streak. They're number 91 overall on Ken Pom. And I think, what is Michigan State, like 20th? They're around 20, I think, on Ken Pom, or 18th or something like
18,
that. Yeah,
18.
right. As we record, these things change, obviously, a little bit. Florida Atlantic is 46 on offense, but they're only 179th in defense, which is clearly their problem this season. They're 1-1 against high majors. They lost Oklahoma State by 8, or beat Oklahoma State by 8, sorry, and they lost to Seton Hall by 2. Their 5 losses are been really close, only averaging about 5-point losses. So they've been competitive. They've been close. They shoot really well from 3. They're 37th in the country, 66th in the country from 2s, and they shoot 37% from 3. They're also inside the top 100 turnover percentage at just barely at 99th. They get to the foul line pretty well, the number 78th in free throw attempts to field goal attempts. The problem is they don't shoot really well when they get there. They're better than Oakland, who Michigan State faced last game, but they still only shoot about 71%, which is good for 196 nationally. And they are a non-presence on the offensive rebounding boards, where they're 290th. And defensively, we mentioned that's where they've had a lot of struggles. They give up a lot of attempts from 3, and opponents tend to be hitting them at pretty high levels. I mean, almost 40% against them outside the arc, which is hard to fathom. They're not a good defensive rebounding team. They foul sort of a decent amount. They're really good against 2s at number 70, and they're 93rd in turnover percentage. So they do turn you over a little bit, but only 142nd in steals. And they play sort of man and they play zone. So we probably expect both of those things. And finally, the other part about their profile is they play really fast. So they have a very fast tempo. They're 25th overall in tempo, and their average length of offensive possession is 18th in the country, which means they're not as fast as Samford that we saw earlier, but certainly pretty fast paced, and a big contrast to Oakland.
Yeah, yet another team, and Michigan State's really seen a lot of these in the early going. If you look at who they've played, I can't prove this, but because I haven't looked deeply enough into it, but anecdotally at least, I don't think we've ever seen a November and December that has featured more fast-paced teams than this one has.
Yeah.
They've seen a lot of them. Samford was that way. North Carolina was that way. Nebraska was that way. I think even Bowling Green played pretty fast. So they've seen a lot of it, and this is another one that fits very comfortably into that category. I think it's going to be interesting to see how things go at FAU. They're a member of the American, so that's the same league that Memphis is in, as an example. Yeah. Not a terrible league, a mid-major plus league, but the upper tier of what that means. And it would be easy to look at Florida Atlantic and say, well, they're a blip on the screen. They were the product of one coach who happened to get it going, and they'll soon sink into irrelevancy from here. But I'm not convinced yet, at least, that that's the case. For them to go get Jacobs was a pretty big deal to succeed Dusty May. And you mentioned his background. So he did 3 years as director of basketball operations at Gonzaga, so part of a very successful program there, but then 7 years as an assistant to Scott Drew at Baylor. And he was Scott Drew's top assistant the last few years. I think he became the top assistant after Jerome Tang left a couple years ago for Kansas State. Jacobs became the number one guy on that staff. So he presumably had options. This was probably not going to be the only job that he got offered. And he also took it knowing full well he wasn't going to get the benefit of any or much of what Dusty May built, because all those kids were, again, it's a different ball game these days. Everybody can up and leave. And so the guys who had eligibility left did, the ones who played major minutes at least, did exactly that. You've got Golden, followed Dusty May to Michigan. You've got Janelle Davis, who went to play for Calipari at Arkansas, and there's a few other guys that are scattered around the country. So he had to believe, Jacobs, I think, had to believe that there was something that Dusty May had built that was actually sustainable, that somebody else could come in and build upon and perhaps even, not only sustain, but maybe even improve, hard as that is to imagine. And I have to believe that's what he thinks, because I don't know why he'd take the job otherwise. They're on, I'd say they're off to a fair start, a decent start. Michigan State will be by far the best team they faced. You mentioned they're 1-1 against high majors. They lost Oklahoma State, who's very much in a rebuilding mode. They beat Oklahoma State. They lost to Seton Hall, who is frankly not a great team this year under Shaheen Holloway. But they've done some solid things. For them to be inside the top 100, that tells you, as you said, this isn't a tomato can. This isn't an automatic, easy kind of win. It's a step up in competition, frankly, from what MSU faced in Oakland, if we're being honest and evaluating it, and I think that it remains to be seen what Jacobs can do in year one. He's obviously going to have to go on a hell of a tear in conference play to have any shot at postseason basketball this year. I mean, they're clearly not in that position as we sit here today. A win over Michigan State at Breslin would go a hell of a long way to helping. That would be a big deal.
Win for sure.
So you can assume that there will be sufficient motivation on their part. But it's an interesting team, offensively, and that was an area. The profile really isn't worlds different than Dusty May's teams were. It maybe wasn't quite as drastic, but Dusty May's teams, were the last couple of years at least, were very good offensively and only okay defensively. And it's kind of the same deal here. They might be a little worse defensively. I haven't checked, but I'm assuming that's the case. But defense wasn't a strength the two previous years where FAU had so much success. It was an offensively oriented team, and they're still that under Jacobs. They're shooting the ball very well. That's just the bottom line. That's the key to their strength to date, such as it is on the offensive end. Rebounding looks like potentially a real issue, because they're very bad on offense and they're mediocre on defense. And it's funny because as we talk about their roster, as we're going to see, they've actually got a lot of size.
Yeah, I was going to say they got a decent size.
At least they start a lot of size. So it's kind of hard to understand why they've been so bad given that, but that would be the major weakness, I would say. Although on defense, the other thing that's very much worth mentioning, they're giving up. It's kind of like Oakland's profile was, except maybe even a little worse. They're giving up a ton of 3-point attempts, and they're one of the 3 worst teams in America defending the three. They're giving up almost 40%.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's really, really awful. And if you want one reason why their defense is where it is, that's a pretty good place to start. So teams have really been taking advantage of that. And we talk a lot about 3-point percentage, both for you and against you, as something of a luck dependent stat. And that's because it is. But when it's this bad, and the frequency of attempts is as high as it is, that equation suggests to me that it's not just bad luck. That there's
Right.
something, they're having a problem stopping opponents from getting really high quality looks. That's what it tells me. So is some of that luck? Yeah, but not all of it.
Yeah, I
So
mean we're far enough into the season. They're 12 games in. At this point, you've some of the noise is gone from your stats, right? I mean, you're a little bit who you
a
are in
bit,
your stats. Things
yeah.
change,
But
obviously.
you could even with 12 games, you could say, um, well, they've been the victims of teams being a little bit hot against them. All right. So maybe in reality they're only a 36% against. That's still
Right.
bad.
Yeah.
And they're
Right.
giving up a ton of them.
Yeah.
So the fact that teams are having that kind of, because here's the thing, if you were if you were being victimized by teams just getting hot against you, but you were actually doing a pretty good job of guarding them, that should mean that the attempts are somewhat constrained.
Yeah.
And that's not happened. It's been the opposite of that. So I think that and rebounding, those are the two weaknesses we're talking about. But again, when they have the ball, they've shot it well. So that's something that you're going to have to deal with in facing this team. And to return to the same theme I talked about a few moments ago, these guys want to play fast, which if you're Tom Izzo, you're Michigan State, hey, bring it on.
Great. Yeah. No
Bring it
kidding.
on. Let's play fast.
All right, so we'll go through opposing lineup here and mention the player that needs to be kept in the gutter. Brought to you by the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. Friends, I assume you have a house or a business, maybe both. They probably have gutters because if you live in Michigan, we get quite a bit of water and rain, snow melt, whatever it is. You want to keep that water away from your foundation. So you want to make sure you have the right people taking care of that. The Brothers Who Just Do Gutters are the ones you should call first. They offer great competitive pricing. They're very responsive. They get there quickly and they do really bang up job. So if you need your gutters repaired, replaced, just cleaned out, maybe put in your leaf guards, they can put they can get up on the ladder and do all that stuff that you don't need to do because it's not safe. So don't do it. Have the professionals do it. And it's very, again, it's very affordable. So you won't regret calling the Brothers Just Do Gutters. Kurt is on the southeast side of the state and Greg is in the west side of the state. So if you're in the state of Michigan, the lower peninsula, you're probably covered by one of them. So give them a call. You can find their ways to get estimates from them through a support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. You just click on the link for either one, wherever you live. And you get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate, and you can't go wrong there. So we'll begin with the starters for FAU, starting with Leland Walker, 6'1" junior transfer, point guard from Eastern Kentucky, averaging 11.1 points a game, 5 assists a game to 2 turnovers a game, so not a bad ratio. He's also tied in the team with a lead of 1.5 steals a game. He's shooting 44, 32, and 78.
Yeah, he's giving them solid point guard play. And this team is actually in really good shape at the point. They have two legitimate options. He's the starter, and nice for them to get a junior. So assuming they can hold on to him, they'll get one more year after this one. But yeah, solid start to his season. He's doing a nice job running the offense. He's shooting reasonably well. I'm sure they'd like that 3-point percentage to bump up a little bit, but it's not terrible. And yeah, they've got to be reasonably happy with what they've gotten so far at that position.
I feel like he's one of the first good point guards we've seen, at least stat wise, for the last couple games, anyways. I feel like we've had a lot of quasi point guards or people who have a lot of trouble
Yeah,
without
it's
turning the ball
that's
over as much as they give
oh
hand assists.
Oakland's had problems. Nebraska is okay there.
Minnesota wasn't
Great.
too good, yeah.
Minnesota's really been struggling
Yeah.
without a good answer. Yeah, you're right. It's probably been North Carolina since they've seen a team with really good lead guard play, but this team has it.
Next is it, I think, Kai Tandy?
Yep.
Yeah, looks like Kentucky Tandy. 6'2", fifth-year player, 6-year player, guard.
Sixth year. Yeah.
Yeah. Should play for Minnesota. He did a year at Jacksonville State, did 4 years at Xavier. He must have been injured at least one of those years, right, to get a red shirt.
He was.
Because, yeah, otherwise, even with the COVID year. So he's still a guy who has a COVID year. 9.3 points a game, 37, 38, 83 shooting, so definitely decent percentage from deep. Coming off a season at Jackson State, he averaged over 17 points a game. So he's definitely a guy who's a threat to score.
Yeah, and I've seen Jacobs talk about that part of the adjustment that his team has had to make early on is he's brought in several guys who were the focal point of their team's offense last year. Tandy would be one of them. And his challenge is trying to blend those guys into a cohesive whole and find roles that are appropriate.
Right.
So, because they can't all be the number one option. And in fact, this is a very balanced team offensively. So it's questionable whether there even really is a number one option. Their leading scorer as of now does not start. So that tells you something. But Tandy's doing a solid job. I looked at his career. He was actually off to a good start at Xavier. He averaged like 6 points a game both his freshman and sophomore years. And then the next 2 years, one of which was ruined by injury, he really tailed off. So I don't know whether maybe the first year back he was still kind of in recovery mode or what it was, but he didn't really get back on the beam at Xavier. So he ended up transferring to Jacksonville State. That was really a positive experience. He learned how to score again, be the focal point of an offense. And now he's back, not quite at the Xavier level, but at a higher level than Jacksonville State, certainly. And he's giving FAU reasonable scoring production, and he shot the ball very well.
Then we have Ken Evans, 6'4" grad transfer from Jackson State. He averaged almost 19 points a game last season. This year, he's averaging 8.8 points a game, pulling down 3.1 rebounds a game, shooting 33, 35, and 83, and definitely seeing a trend here, mid-30s to high 30s and three-point shooting here.
Similar deal to Tandy, focal point of a lower level team, transfers up to FAU's level, and he's not scoring as much, but he's playing reasonably efficient basketball offensively. So similar deal, just a little more size with Evans at 6'4".
Then we have Baba Miller, 6'11" junior transfer from Florida State, where he averaged 7.6 points a game and 5 rebounds a game. This season with FAU, he's averaging 10.9 points a game and almost 7.5 rebounds a game, shooting 51 and 43 and 60. And that 43 is actually a decent volume for threes for a guy 6'11". Also a little over 1 block a game. And so really good player to have for FAU to pick up from Florida State.
This is one of them, one of the situations that tells me that Jackus must have gotten a commitment that he believed in from FAU, that they were going to continue to build on what Dusty May had built, right, and sustain the program, because I have a hard time imagining that they could get Baba Miller without some kind of commitment. And keep in mind, remember that the year prior, coming off the Final Four, I think a lot of people figured, well, either Dusty May is going to leave for another job, or they're going to lose all those guys.
Right.
And that did not happen.
Yeah.
So I haven't drilled down into all the details around it, but I remember hearing that FAU had thought they'd figured enough out, and the proof is there. They kept that team largely intact. And then this year, all those guys left, but I think that was because, of the coaching change. You would expect it. But to go out and get a kid like Baba Miller, who had high major opportunities, he absolutely did. Because he wasn't a star at Florida State, but he was productive. He was productive enough and had 2 years of eligibility left. At 6'11", with a skill set to go out and hit threes at that size, and yet also rebound, also give you some rim protection. I mean, that's a high major 4-man and a good one. So FAU must be doing something right as a program to be able to get him. I would say, although he's not their leading scorer, he's their biggest impact player at this stage. And he's the guy on a team that I think has a lot of guys that you would say, well, that's a player on a good mid-major plus team. Not guys that are easy to see. None of the other guys we've talked about to this point are players that you say, hey, that's a Big Ten player on an American team.
Yeah.
Baba Miller is a Big Ten level player on an American team.
And so, yeah, already you can just tell at 6'11" as a four-man, this team has a lot more size than Michigan State's seen
Mhm.
in the last few games. Then we have Maka Vukitaitis. He is a 7-footer, 245-pound freshman from Lithuania. He was the first big recruit, obviously, with Jacobs, both figuratively and literally. He's already averaging 10 points a game, 5.8 rebounds a game, shooting 69% from the floor, and a paltry 50% from the line.
Yeah, but again, for a true freshman, and I think he's 20 years old. So, like a lot of Euro kids, he's
Right.
actually a year or two more mature than the average American freshman. But again, shows you, and this kid, my understanding is this kid had some options as well. So they've chosen to support the program, and boy, what a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
This is a legit 5-man who clearly understands how to play the game at his size and his position. Unlike Miller, he's not a stretch guy, but that's a hell of a response too. You lose Vlad Golden,
Pick up
and you replace him with replace a Russian with a Lithuanian, and they're about the same size.
Yeah.
And his numbers, I'll tell you what, Vlad Golden wasn't producing this while as a freshman. So this is a real statement for this program that they can trot out two interior guys of this quality. That's a 1-2 punch that, as I say, a Big Ten team wouldn't be ashamed of to trot out there at all.
Is really interesting. And I think just sort of a side note, just seeing all the Europeans that are now you're seeing college basketball, it's like you're just definitely seeing what was happening in the NBA, right? Just now happened filter down to the college ranks more than I think we've
Well,
seen. But I mean,
there's one big reason for it.
well, I mean, the money is certainly a huge reason,
That's
right?
it.
And I mean,
That's it.
it's interesting. As soon as the NIL open up, you starting to see all these Europeans flood in.
Change the whole dynamic.
Yeah,
Yep. Now that they can get paid, the advantages to staying in Europe have been reduced.
yeah,
And this is a thing. People talk about, and it becomes very easy to, college basketball was such a joke compared to what it used to be in the 80s and the 90s. And what people are usually referring to is the fact that the true upper tier players tend to only stay the 1 year they have to,
right.
and they're gone. That's true. You do not have Patrick Ewing staying 4 years anymore. That stuff doesn't happen. And so you say, well, that reduces the quality at the top. Yeah, that's undeniably true. But I would argue that there is, especially since NIL, the exact phenomenon we're talking about has continued to improve the overall talent level in the game. It may not be as mature because a lot of those guys are only going to play 1 year.
Right.
Not this kid, but for example, keep it in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Illinois
usage.
has 2 European freshmen,
Yeah.
one of whom is generally considered to be a likely lottery pick at this point, and the other, I'm not sure, their big man, if he's seen as a first rounder, but it wouldn't shock. So those guys aren't going to stay 4 years. They might not stay beyond this year, but are they good enough as freshmen to be making an impact for a good team? Yeah, absolutely. And is college basketball getting the benefit of players who historically had not been coming to play? Yes. So, there's give and take with everything, right? But I do think that is something we are seeing much, much more of in recent years. And I don't think it looks set to fade away anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, then moving on to reserves, we can begin with Caleb Glenn, 6'6" sophomore transfer from Louisville. He's leading the team in scoring, as you mentioned, coming off the bench there, almost 14 points a game, 4.3 rebounds a game, plays 25 minutes despite not starting. But we've seen that just with Michigan State with Jace Richardson, who sometimes plays 20 plus minutes too, right off the bench.
Yep.
Glenn is shooting 60, 43, and 67. And so it's not surprising that he's averaging almost 14 points a game with those numbers.
Yeah, and he played for Louisville, for a bad Louisville team last year, but he was a little deeper in their rotation. He's obviously playing a much bigger role at FAU, but this shouldn't be a big surprise. He was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. So it's not a shocker that maybe it took him a year to find himself at this level, but now he's comfortable and he's producing. Yeah, putting up very big numbers. And again, it's a luxury for FAU to have a guy like that who's not even starting. It shows you that they do have some depth. And I've seen Jackus talk about how important it is that his team have quality depth, because if you play fast the way they want to, we know this following the Michigan State program, you are going to have a tough time doing that as well as you want if you can't reliably go, 9 deep at
Right.
least. So it's very important.
Yeah, and then just to follow that point, Trey Carroll, 6'7", 230-pound junior, he was reserved for the first couple of years at FAU, but now he's playing much more than he used to, which he was playing 8 minutes a game. Now he's moved in a bigger role. He's scoring almost 10 and a half points a game, almost 4 rebounds a game, and playing 16 minutes, shooting 57, 47, and 68. So he's living up to his first name, Trey.
Yeah, and gives them, a sense I have is that he can play inside and out, so he can play the wing or the 4 spot. Great shooting numbers early on. And yeah, this is an example of a guy who actually stayed. He had been in the program for 2 years, hadn't been a huge part of what they were doing. He played a limited rotation role, but now being asked to do a lot more, and he is producing.
Then we have Nicolo Moretti, 6'1", sophomore transfer from Illinois, where he played only in 18 games. He's averaging 8.5 points a game, shooting 47, 38, and 81. He's also averaging 4 assists to just 1 turnover a game. So pretty good reserve point guard. I was gonna say I don't remember him playing. Yeah, well, that's what you said.
Yeah, you
sparingly
don't,
played in Illinois. I remember them talking about him like he was going to make an
yes.
impact, and he just never really got on the floor.
So here's the deal. If you remember, Illinois really got caught at the point guard position last
Yes,
year, or so it seemed.
right, because they had
They
Sky,
lost.
right? Yeah,
They lost Sky Clark.
yep.
But that had happened during the previous season. Then they lost. Was it the Epps kid who's ended
Yep.
up at Georgetown?
Mm-hmm.
They had a few guys that they thought would be part of the answer. And Curbelo, one of my all-time Big Ten whipping boys, they had a lot of different guys that they churned through, and they signed Moretti kind of late. And so the thought was, well, maybe this guy's a European kid, not surprisingly due to his name. He's Italian. Maybe this is a guy that could step in and help. And instead, Brad Underwood decided, well, we're going to go about this a completely different way. And we're not going to really play a true point guard. Instead, we're going to try to play an NBA style game where we're looking to exploit mismatches, particularly physical mismatches, and we'll just play ball screen stuff until we get switches and get the matchup we want, and then attack that. And they did it extremely well. It was very productive for them. Illinois had a really nice season. Moretti barely played. I mean, he got into 18 games, but his minutes were sparing. So he transfers out, ends up at FAU, and lo and behold, looks like he can actually play. I mean, the shooting numbers are fine. 47, 38, 81. You'll take that.
Yeah.
But he's almost got it's just a little under a 4-to-1 ratio going. And he's playing 22 minutes. So you put him together with Leland Walker, and this team is very solid at the point, or at least offensively.
Right. Yeah. Of course, that's, as we mentioned, the profile.
Yeah.
The offensive numbers are good. It's where they struggle on defense and getting stops.
Right.
So finally, Devin Vanderpool, 6'4" freshman, didn't play last year at FAU. He's playing this year, obviously. He's averaging just a little over 1.5 points a game, shooting 28, 17, and 100. Obviously, limited volume. He only plays about 10 minutes a game.
Yeah, I would say right now the idea there is, as we said, a team that wants to play fast has got to have a certain amount of depth to make it function. So you would say right now, Vanderpool isn't doing a lot in terms of his production to earn minutes. It's mostly down to they need somebody to eat up some time, to keep other guys, to allow them to get rest so that they can be at an optimal level when they're playing. That's really what he's holding the fort down, and that's about it right now.
Yeah. So who would you pick for Michigan State to focus on and keep in the gutter of this game for FAU?
Well, the easy choice would be Caleb Glenn because he's leading them in scoring, but I'm going to go with Baba Miller. I think, that's a very versatile player. Can score inside and out.
Yeah.
And he's important enough to them that he's going to be on the floor a ton. So I'm going to go with Baba Miller. And that also represents a pretty interesting matchup with either of Jackson Kohler or Xavier Booker.
Yeah. Right.
This is a game that I think Michigan State is probably going to go big a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And again, both of those guys, Kohler and Booker, there's some similarities between what they do and what Baba Miller does. With Kohler, not so much physically, but in terms of the inside out components, the fact that they can both rebound and also give you something of a defensive presence around the rim. So that'll be an interesting battle.
Yeah. It's certainly, if you think about it, it'd be difficult. This is a sort of difficult game to imagine, Cohen Carr being able to slip over and play the four much if you've got a 6'11" guy.
There will be chances, and it's because I think there will
I mean,
be
he's not going to play
times
40
where,
minutes.
say,
Right.
you got to play 40 minutes. And I think there will be times where, say, a Trey Carroll, who's only 6'7", 230, is going to play some four.
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
there will be times, but it might be that Michigan State looks at those moments as situations where they can exploit it going with a bigger player against that guy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. It goes both ways. Right. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And then this is one of those games where you kind of look like, boy, with these two giants there, 6'11", 7 feet. Michigan State's got four players they can play, inside. And, if there's foul trouble, you can see
Yep.
things getting kind of complicated because you don't have McCullough because he's redshirted. Anyway, this is just some of the consideration. Of course, it goes both ways. Again, it could be just as much a problem for FAU as it is for Michigan State, just depending where the fouls turn out, if they do become an issue. All right. So let's talk about who cleans the glass best. Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, again, if you want to stay off the ladders, which I highly recommend, especially this sort of weather, get the pros to do it for you. They can clean your windows. You don't want to get out there and do it anyway. And honestly, who's cleaning the windows, getting up on ladders, cleaning their own windows? It just doesn't happen. So be honest with yourself. Hire the professional to do it for you. They can also go to the inside. They get the screens and windowsills. They can do some interior painting, whatever you need done. They can really spruce up the house. They can power wash as well outside the house. And unlike, some guy you hired in the neighborhood or something like that who fires at maximum pressure from, and peels off the paint off the side of your house, they get right on the ladders when they do the power washing and make sure they do a nice, gentle clean as opposed to just shredding the paint. So contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, very large region. They're expanding into Kalamazoo now, and I'm not sure by the time if they're still there. So if you want ever in the Kalamazoo area as well, you might have an opportunity to get the Squeegee Squad to take care of you as well. So call Troy and his team. You can contact them at our support page at the Final Fours on theschedule.com/support. You can find the link there. 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And they will take care of you again for interior painting, cleaning windows, cleaning your house, whatever you need done. They can take care of it. And they'll get out there even in weather like right now in December. So call them today. So who cleans the glass best right now? Rod's ahead 4-3. But we have 7 successful Jackson Kohler picks, 0 non-Jackson Kohler picks so far for the season. Obviously, it's going to be a game where there are a lot of big players playing, and so you're going to have, I think, a lot of opportunities for guys like Sapala and Cooper and Booker to get some boards. And so I think I'm going to go with Jackson Kohler, just to leave you a little. You thought I was going to have a stroke there and actually not pick him, yeah. But I just at this point, I mean, the guy has shown ability to not only, but on both ends, right? Offensive, defensively, he's just outworking people. I think it's going to come down to when he doesn't do it, it's going to be a game, I think, where he, for some reason, doesn't play a lot of minutes, whether it's foul issues or that's kind of like the only scenario I could see, or just, luck of the draw. He just doesn't.
That or could be, you could have a game where he just happens to occupy the opponent enough that he's not getting those rebounds, but somebody else, Michigan State, is
exactly
benefiting from it. I'm going to go. And, there is something nagging at me that says, bet on Carson Cooper to have a bit of a bounce back. As opposed to the Oakland game, this is a game where it's much easier to see him fitting in well.
Sure.
But I'm going to go with Sapala. Right?
Yeah.
Apollo's been playing very consistent basketball for the most part. And it's also a game that should play to his strengths.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he had last game. I mean, Kohler had 10, Sapala had 8.
Right.
So it's not like it was a huge separation between the two. Just right now, Kohler's
No.
just, you know, he's just really just feeling it from the boards. So, all right, let's move on to the 5 keys to the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you need something and it's still probably time before Christmas to get it real quick, if you get the order in quick, you go head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off. You type in Final Four and the coupon code when you check out. So make sure you head on over there and check out the huge selection that Gabe Brittany have. Their business is located in Portland, Michigan. They're Michigan State grads. They have the licensing for all the vintage and the current Michigan State logos. So if you want like the old stuff or the new stuff, the semi old stuff, you can check it out. You can find most of this stuff there at Nudge Printing, and their products are super high quality. Like there's hoodies, their t-shirts, coats, hats. They've got. Gabe spent a lot of time just making custom hats, and so they're really pretty sweet. These black hats. So check out all their huge selection. You won't regret it. They do a fantastic job for the Spartan in your life or for yourself. You know, just whether you go into games or just head around town, just hanging out at home, whatever it is, you can show your Spartan spirit by wearing some Spartan gear. And they also have a large selection of non-Spartan stuff too for other states or other schools in the state of Michigan, the like Albion and Grand Valley, Saginaw Valley, those sorts of schools, and the Central and Western and Eastern. So check all that stuff out. You can get that for, you know, maybe the relative or someone else in your family who's not a Michigan State person, but they still want to support their team. If you're looking for University of Michigan stuff, you just went to the wrong place. So don't even bother. Check out Nudge Printing. So talk about the keys of the game. First key to the game is pace. And as we mentioned, FAU plays fast. So last game we had the second slowest team in the country, and now we're going to one of the fastest teams in the country at what, top 25 or top 20 tempo. So we think in general that seems to play to Michigan State's strength.
Yeah, and if you're Michigan State, I think in any game, you say, okay, if these guys want to go head to head against us and making this a 94-foot game, let's do it.
Yeah.
And especially, you're talking about a program, at least in terms of the players, that has never seen Michigan State. Their
Right.
coach has, because MSU, I think I would have the math right, given that he was at Baylor for 7 seasons. I think that means he saw MSU twice. No,
Right.
make it 3 times, because last year they saw them in Atlantis.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. Where they
And
beat
then
Michigan State. Yeah.
and then there was another tournament which might have also been Atlantis during Miles and Cassius and those guys' freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he would have seen. So he's seen them some.
And
That may
probably
help.
Gonzaga once or twice, maybe.
Gonzaga, at least
I mean, he
back
wasn't a
that
coach,
far,
right? But
back that far, yeah. So there's some familiarity there.
anyway,
But the players, there's not.
yeah.
And so that may mean we're able to see Michigan State get loose a little bit more than they were able to against Oakland. I really do think it's a hard, though we talked about this and have referenced it many times over the years. Just as you could say, well, it was a hard thing for Michigan State to simulate that crazy zone that Oakland plays. It's also a very hard thing to simulate what Michigan State does, especially off made baskets. You're just, as a player, you are just not programmed to deal with that. That's not normal. And to see a team right after you score coming right back at you, very few teams play that way. So that's the challenge for FAU. I think that may cut to Michigan State's advantage. But,
Yeah.
you know, they always want to win a game when, okay, you want to play fast. That's the element we want to be in. So, you know, it follows that MSU should believe they can win the game playing that way.
Well, and I think at this point, I mean, Michigan State's played successfully at that speed against everybody. I don't think that's like it's been to the detriment yet. Even North Carolina, who, you know, we mentioned it plays fast.
Exactly.
You're right. So there's no reason to think that you should be afraid of FAU
and that's the one, and that's the one program, the only program. I'm not saying there's never been anybody that's played fast with them under Izzo and has beaten them, but North Carolina was the one program that plays fast in exactly the same way that Michigan State does.
Right.
which not, like these guys don't. These guys are not looking to push off made baskets. That's not their thing. North Carolina does exactly the same stuff. And they were the one team that could say to Michigan State, oh, okay, you want to play this game? Great, let's do it and win. We've seen it happen many times over the years. Didn't work out that way in Maui, thankfully. But you're right. This team has played a number, we said at the outset, they've played a number of fast-paced opponents so far, and MSU's come out on top consistently.
Yes, and so the second key to the game is the glass. Michigan State has been an elite. I think you can say they're elite offensive rebounding team now, especially after their performance against Oakland.
They're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be top 20 sort of be considered
Yeah,
elite.
I
Something
think
like
they're
that.
eight. I think they're 18th, right?
Yeah, so yeah, defensively they're technically elite. We're not. It was not an elite effort against Oakland.
They're still 10th.
Yeah, still 10th.
They
Yeah,
were still
but
10th after last night.
it was not an elite effort. Yeah,
No,
against
no, it wasn't.
Oakland. And this is a bad rebounding team as well, just like it was Oakland did. So this is a team that is not good on the offensive boards. They don't usually do much, of course. Neither does Oakland, and they did against Michigan State. And they're also a very bad defensive rebounding team, which bodes very well for Michigan State, getting some stuff done on the board. So this is obviously, we always talk about how many chances you score. Turnovers can affect that, but also obviously second chances. And so this is something that Michigan State not only needs to get the second chances, but like Oakland, it'd be nice for them to cash those in.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a believer in Michigan State's rebounding because it's not just size, it's not just athleticism, it's those things plus the motor and the way they're attacking rebounds this year that I think has me convinced that this is sustainable.
Yeah.
To some degree, whether they stay exactly where they are in the rankings or, it's quite possible that they'll slip a little bit because they're going to be pretty soon.
Yeah, tougher teams
consistently, and just in general, not just tougher teams, but Big Ten teams. Over the course of Big Ten schedule, you tend to see a number of teams that are also very good, at least in one area or another, if not both. But I think it's going to hold up. I think at the end of the year, we're going to look back and say this was kind of a return to program staples in that way,
Yeah, and I would guess too after the effort at Oakland, there's going to be an emphasis on defensive rebounding, and that's
100%.
We're not going to see that again like we saw against Oakland.
Well, you saw it shored up in the second half, it
really
only. But I agree with you. I think there is very definitely going to be a message sent in practice that's just not excusable. And I would think we're going to see a better effort in that way. Izzo was, I mentioned in our post game that I didn't think Michigan State half-assed it in the first half. I didn't think, except in terms of the rebounding. But I thought overall, they played, reasonably hard. It was just in the second half they turned it up to another gear in terms of the intensity. Listening to Izzo's post game, he didn't agree with me on that. So I think that I would be very surprised if and he pointed out, he said that has not been a problem effort with this group, but it was a problem in the first half, and he's going to address that. So I think it's reasonable to expect they're going to come out with a little more energy to start the game. And in terms of how that ends up impacting the rebounding battle, I think you're probably talking about a significant impact there against an opponent that has just not been very good despite their size.
Well, I think, I think Michigan State may have listened to our show and thought, oh, this team doesn't have offensive rebounds, so we don't have to worry about it as much. But also, the one thing about this team that you say compared to the last few years is the last few years you feel like they had to go into a different, they had to not be themselves in order to recover and do better defensive rebounding. I feel like this team, that's sort of who they are. And so that was more the anomaly was more the last game than, than the previous games, right?
That what you're saying there is that it comes naturally
to
this group. I don't know if it's entirely that, but it comes it's a sustainable thing because they've all been programmed the way that you need to be to do that job well. So it does feel natural now, whereas with the previous group, it wasn't ever really that way.
And so moving on to the third key to the game is the perimeter. So 3 straight games of 35% or more in 3-point shooting. Pretty good. I mean, not sensational, but very good. Florida Atlantic is a very good outside shooting team. And Michigan State, but they're a very bad defensive 3-point shooting team, as we mentioned. The team's almost shooting 40% from them. So obviously, home cooking, there's an opportunity to get some stuff going for Michigan State. But this may be a difference maker. If one team is hitting a lot more threes or doing a lot better, then maybe that may be the difference. And so, what is Michigan State? I think almost 28%, 27.5% or something like that from three for the season, up to 335th.
Knocking on the door of 28.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
You do
they need a
this.
40% plus day with decent volume to get that into like 31%. But
I was going to say they're knocking on the door of crossing the 30% threshold, where and at that point, then you start to say, okay, this isn't. It's not great, but it's not a huge negative.
yeah,
And as we talked about too, the way I look at it is start from that Minnesota game.
right. Yeah.
And whatever you do the rest of the way is what you do the rest of the way. The first bat, that's done. That's in the books. You can't change that. But it also doesn't impact just because we look at it and say, well, this is what they're shooting on the year. We see this sometimes. You'll see a team that doesn't really start to get it until they get into conference play. And then all of a sudden, you have to keep up and you have to acknowledge the fact that, well, this is a different team now. And so what they did in November really isn't tremendously relevant to what they are at this moment, And I think that's the deal with Michigan State and its 3-point shooting. But what I've been saying the last few games is you want to sustain a level of reasonable success. And to me, that number's at 35% and up. So the Oakland game, they just got over the hump with that. That makes 3 straight games that the numbers have been at a level where you can say a turnaround is happening. And you string it together for 3 straight games, that's the beginning of saying that you're doing something in a sustained way. They need to continue that. The numbers for Florida Atlantic scream at us that they should get the opportunity to make it 4.
Yeah.
That they are going to get a lot of high quality looks. It's a matter of hitting them. But everything you could ask for in terms of what opportunities you're going to have, you would expect to be there.
All right. So the fourth key of the game is the 2s, the 2-point shots. Michigan State has been really, really good from 2s. They were not good against Oakland. They weren't terrible. They were just not as good.
They weren't great.
Yeah,
they weren't.
They're still top. They're fell out of the top 25. They're now 33rd in 2-point shooting. This is part of the reason we were so optimistic about this offense, because despite the 3-point shooting being abysmal, every other part, including the 2-point shooting, was really, really good. So, I think it was due to the fact that Oakland made them a little uncomfortable, especially in the first half. Kind of some weird shots.
For sure.
So, and it in many ways, those zones when they kind of get into it's almost like a mental thing. Like they get in your head, just like that Syracuse game, right? Like that Syracuse game we always want to forget from the NCAA tournament, where they're open, but they're not like really open, right? And so you take bad shots.
It's entirely a mental thing, because what happens is you're finding yourself in positions and you're catching the ball in positions that you're not used to. So you have space where you don't expect it. Where you expect to have space, you don't have it.
Right.
That's what happens. And you saw it over and over in last night's game. I think it really affected Michigan State. And the reason I'm talking about 2s is I thought it really affected Michigan State inside the arc. Mm-hmm. I thought it had a lot to do with why, and I know we talked about this last night, the MSU bigs took some shots that they haven't been taking this year, some strange forced shots that didn't look comfortable. And I think it was mental. I think it was because of the way the zone had them out of sorts, out of sync. I also think that MSU's guards were not finishing at the rim quite as well as we've been used to seeing. So those are the things that you want to see turned around in this game. FAU will play some zone, but they don't play what Oakland does. It's much more conventional stuff. I tried to do some digging around because Jackus was obviously at Baylor, and Baylor has become a program that's played a lot of 1-3-1.
Okay.
But I watched segments of, I think it was 4 games last night. They're games against bigger opponents that they played this year, and I didn't see any 1-3-1. Doesn't mean that they won't trot it out, but it doesn't appear to be a staple of what they're doing. They play a lot of man. They also play what looked to me like some fairly conventional 2-3 zone. So if they do play a lot of zone against MSU, it should be easier for Michigan State to get into a comfort zone and get the kind of shots that they're used to getting and feel comfortable within the offense.
Yeah, well, and as we mentioned at the top of the show, this is a team that plays both man and zone. So they just have to, the key for, of course, the point guards is to recognize what's the defense is and to have their, run their offense differently, based on what they're seeing.
Absolutely. But even if they're playing zone, if it's a conventional zone, you can still run some ball screen stuff against that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's just they have to and that was something that Oakland really, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but in retrospect, I think it was easy to see they took a lot of that away. The way that zone functions. And so that's part of the reason, for example, Carson Cooper really struggled last night. Carson Cooper is good in MSU's pick and roll game, and he's become effective as a weapon off pick and roll when they have him do rim dives and the guards are finding him with a lob at the basket. That wasn't there for him, so an entire area of the game where he usually makes some offensive contributions was taken away. I think it might be available in this game.
Yeah. All right. So the fifth and final key to the game is the free throw line. So Michigan State is in the top 50 in free throw rate, which is, well, never happened before, right? For Michigan, for Tom Izzo era anyway.
Not a Tom Izzo thing.
Since we started keeping track of statistics, right? They're just outside the top 10. They're number 11th in free throw percentage, shooting almost 81%, which I just am sort of stunned by. A lot of good shooters. And we got to the point, as we talked about last game, the only player you feel not comfortable shooting a free throw is really Shimon Sapala at this point. Everybody else you assume is going to at least, at worst, split, but probably hit both. And so anyway.
Well, they don't have anybody on the wrong side of 50% anymore.
Right, exactly.
At the moment. And they've only got a couple guys that are on the wrong side of 70%.
Yeah, which is stunning. I mean,
that's how you are shooting 81% as a team. You know,
everybody contributing. So obviously, and Florida Atlantic does not shoot well, but that's it. The percentage is the percentage. Some days you shoot better than others. Depends who's shooting. Depends.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I've lost you.
We're back.
Okay, there we go.
Free throw line. Yep. So basically, just that it is important for Michigan State to get there quite a bit. Like they've been averaging of almost 24 times a game.
Yep.
And so they got to hit that rate. And then if they hit them at the same rate, that's going to be a huge advantage for them over FAU, you'd assume.
Well, look, FAU is a bad defensive team. So oftentimes what goes along with being a bad defensive team is not only that you're allowing opponents to shoot well against you, that kind of, goes without saying, but that also you can be struggling. You often will see those teams struggle to guard an opponent to the point that they're forced to commit fouls. And Michigan State has been very good this year. Even a game like last night, where for quite a while, I was really thinking, boy, this is one where maybe we only get 12 free throw attempts. It just didn't seem like it was heading that way. You look up in the end, by the end, they get 23. They're basically on average. I don't think, it remains to be seen. There can always be anomalies, but I'm expecting this to be more of a normal game for Michigan State in terms of the frequency of getting to the line. And as we talked about last night, it's really spread. At the start of the year, you looked at a guy like Frankie Fiddler and said, all right, by virtue of his presence, we're going to see an improvement.
Yeah.
But now in recent games where he hasn't done as much in that
He's
way,
hardly been to the line, really.
you look at it and they're still doing it as a group. And it's because it's for a lot of reasons. It's not just one simple thing. I think part of it is that they're playing fast, makes you harder to guard. Part of it is that their guards are better at and have a better mindset for looking to press the advantage, to go to the rim, force a defense to counter them. If they don't foul them, all right, I'm going to hit a layup. If you do foul me, I'm going to hit my 2 free throws. The bigs are more active, which is allowing them, somebody like Xavier Booker getting to the line for 6 free throw attempts yesterday. That's something you didn't see from him last year when he played, right?
Yeah.
He's still, nobody's going to mistake him for Zach Randolph, but is he mixing it up and getting himself in positions around the basket where he's going to create a problem for an opponent? Yes, he's doing that much better, much more consistently. More work to go, but there's progress there. So you just go up and down the lineup and you can see Michigan State is putting opponents under much more pressure, which is leading to them getting fouled more, which is leading to them getting more free throw attempts. And then to make it an even bigger impact, they're hitting them. They're cashing them in. We'd still be talking about it even if Michigan State was shooting, 71%. But the fact that they're shooting 81 and getting there with this kind of frequency, huge deal.
Yeah.
Huge deal. And it's another reason, along with the twos and along with offensive rebounding in particular, why this was still a good team even when they were shooting abysmally from 3. Now that they've picked it up from 3, all of a sudden you have the offense in the top 30.
Yeah, right.
That's all it took. And I'm not patting ourselves on the back. It was a fairly obvious thing to say, but it's true. During that start, were we not saying once the 3-point shots start falling at a better rate, and they will, this is going to become a very, very good offensive team, because the other things they're already doing well are things that should be sustainable. And so far, that's what we've seen.
It'd be interesting looking to see what the Michigan State's numbers of the last, say, 4 games, if they would be even more than top 30.
I'm not sure where the offense sits, but I can tell you that their 3-point shooting over the last 4 games is, I believe, at 38% or 37.5, something like that.
Yeah.
So that is, you're adding that to everything else. We know over this recent time, the offensive rebounding has continued, has actually probably been elevated.
Sure.
The transition game up until last night has stayed steady. 2-point shooting up until last night has stayed pretty steady. The only thing offensively that feels to me like it's gone in reverse, and it's not at a huge level, certainly not at a level where you say, well, this is a problem now, but it is a little bit in reverse, is the turnovers. They've been a little more turnover prone lately. They had the one bad game against Nebraska, which kind of got covered up because they won by 37. But they did have problems with turnovers. So that's gone backward a little bit. But again, it's still, even if you look at the picture as it currently stands, where they're outside the top 100 in turnover rate, but you put it into the context of Tom Izzo's historic tenure at MSU, they still check in as a high-level Izzo team.
Yeah.
In that regard. So it's only so bad. So all those things are still really good. And then you're adding this elevated jump shooting to the mix. You get a team that's climbed. There was a point where I think Michigan State's offense was maybe like at 60.
Yeah, 56 or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, now you're in not too long a period of time, at least in terms of number of games being played, you're talking about a top 30 offense.
And that's within a 3-point shooting percentage of 28%, right? Because they take the whole season into account.
Absolutely. Right. But it goes to show you what kind of impact what we figured would happen
Yeah.
has had once it started to actually happen, because all those other things, I don't think they're going away.
Yeah.
I really don't.
All right. Well, I don't know about you, but I am very excited to go back to the Breslin Center. It has been a long time because I missed the Nebraska game because I was on vacation. So I can't even remember the last game.
Wow.
When was that? That was before
Wow.
Thanksgiving sometime.
Samford, right?
Sanford. Yeah. It's been forever.
Yeah, that seems like a long time ago
I hope
now.
I don't get lost if I can make it there. Okay. So find my seats again. So looking forward to getting the ice cream sandwich. My son's back from college, so he's excited to go get an ice cream sandwich. He actually went to Oakland with his friend to the game the other night. Had a great time at Little Caesars, but he's like, oh, the one thing I don't have is I don't have an ice cream sandwich. So anyway, so
I
not
wanted
that,
before we close,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you because I brought this up on the Spartan Mag board today, and you have mentioned maybe on an occasion or two over the years that you have a familial connection to Drake, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And I happened to see Drake had a huge lead that they blew last
Hmm.
night against Kansas State, and then they end up winning it on close to a buzzer beater. I think it was with 3 seconds to play.
Yeah.
They hit a three to beat Kansas State. They're 10-0. But what's remarkable about it, and I'm bringing this up because it references a theme that we've touched on several times this year already, but even in a more profound way with Drake. Drake had a coach who had been very successful in
Yeah.
DeVries, who left
Darren DeVries. Yeah.
to take the job at West Virginia. We talked about that last coaching cycle that he was likely to move. He was a guy that I thought Michigan might hire. He was in
Hmm.
that mix, ends
Yep.
up West Virginia, takes his son, who was two-time Missouri Valley Player of the Year.
Yep.
And all Drake does is they go out and they hire a guy from the D2 level, Ben McCollum, right?
Yep.
He brings 4 of his players from the D2 level with him. They're all starting. And Drake is 10-0. I think they're 3-0 against high majors
Yeah.
so far. It's been remarkable that you could lose a coach as good as DeVries was and arguably say the program is better.
I I think they're more than arguable. I mean, DeVries was there. So it's interesting because, Missouri Valley, there are ebbs and flows to the teams. You see teams like Bradley that are
Sure.
really good and they kind of fall off for a while. And
Yeah.
Drake had, my dad always talks about Drake when my dad was going to Drake back in the 60s, they went to the Final Four. And they played UCLA, and they lost by, I think, a bucket to UCLA in the Final Four, lost to Lou Alcindor, who interestingly,
They've been sporadically
yeah.
good. I mean, I
And they've had
remember
occasional years where they're okay. Yeah.
they had a guy I think in the 80s who played in the NBA for a while named Lewis Lloyd.
Okay.
Who was a forward, like a 6'6" guy, was a really good, an All-American. So they've had, I know they've got good tradition,
But not much. I mean, I would say
not like, yeah.
It's been really pretty. They've been an okay program, or like a middling sort of Missouri Valley program. Never the worst, but but Darren DeVries definitely put him up to a new level. I mean, he really built that program up, and then once his son joined the team, that's when they really took off, and they got some good transfers, and he was very successful. And I thought, well, once he leaves, they're gonna, they'll kind of go back to the old
Right,
Drake,
which is and
what usually
you're
happens.
right. You're right to point it out because frequently the MVC over the years, if you look at it, has been sort of a AAA for the Big
Yeah.
Ten and the Big
Right.
12, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So a lot of guys, at a Southern Illinois, right, or an
Yep.
Illinois State, you think about these guys who come in, they have a program, getting it done for a while, and then they move on. I mean, Dana Altman built Creighton up and then leaves
Yep.
Creighton, and Wichita State had that over the years at times. You're right, it's cyclical, but
Yeah.
I was just really struck by that because it's remarkable that you've got 4 starters and a head coach coming from the D2 ranks and having this kind of success, but it shouldn't be. This guy, and I didn't realize this until today. I knew he was good at the D2 level. I didn't realize how good. He had been at Northwest Missouri State, I believe it is. He's won in 15 years. This guy has won 81% of his games, 83% of his league games, 4 national titles. So I look at this and I look at what he's done at Drake. And the question that comes to my mind is, how did it take 15 years? Because we've seen this, right?
Yeah, right.
Last year, right about this time, we were talking about Josh Schertz at Indiana State, who is now
Mm-hmm.
at St. Louis.
Yeah.
Had a similar track record, although he never won a national title. He got to a few Final Fours at the D2 level, but didn't quite break through. McCollum won the damn thing 4 times.
Yeah.
And so what it makes me think of, and apart from your connection to Drake, the reason I'm bringing it up just as maybe food for thought for listeners is, to me, we've been talking about it all year long, that we've now entered this phase where a guy could be coming from D2, D3, NIA. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. We've been
Yeah.
talking about several guys over the course of this year on opponents' rosters who have been very successful moving up to the D1 level as players. But we see it as coaches too. And I just think to myself, if I'm the athletic director at a have not, to put a blunt term on it,
Yeah. Not
at
a major school.
at the
Yeah.
high,
Right.
no, a have not at the high major level.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm a
Yeah,
high
yeah.
major program, but I'm not getting it done.
Penn State.
Obvious.
Well, that's not that is extreme.
They've got a guy now, though.
Yeah, they do.
Obvious
Right.
example to me right now, and I like Ben Johnson. I'm a fan of his,
Yes.
but that's an obvious one, is it not? Why would you not take a flyer on Ben McCollum? Or if you are a coach of, and year to year it changes who's the have not in, say, the SEC. But in the SEC, or maybe even parts of the ACC, why would you not take a flyer on Bucky McMillan at Samford? These guys, not that he came from the D2 level, but he came from the high school level,
right,
to become a college head coach, and has had tremendous success there. You've got to try, if you're in that position, I think you've got to try something that is outside of the norm. And the norm is, well, you go hire somebody who's been an assistant at a high major.
Right.
And it just, to me, God bless Drake if they're able to keep him. But if it were me and I were at a school like I just described, and Ben McCollum keeps this up to any degree, I don't even think he has to win the Missouri Valley. But if he continues to have a very, very good year, why would you not look at him to run your program? Because these are the kind of guys who have already proven they know how to identify talent. They know how to figure out who's a guy who isn't highly sought after, who can actually play. And then they also clearly know how to develop those guys into great players. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there.
And game coaching too. Yeah, right.
Well, right. All that. Yes.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Drake, and this is more a Missouri Valley thing, and you've seen this a lot of times. You went through a bunch of teams, and those teams you mentioned, they're not part of the Missouri Valley. Many of them, Wichita State was left.
Right.
Creighton was left.
UIC, Loyola Chicago came in and out in a blink of an eye.
And so I think what you have, and so it's an interesting situation for Drake. And I don't know, I'll admit, I don't know anything about Drake. It's sort of like it's a smaller school, but many of these are small schools. So, what Drake does, and because there are two options. One is, Drake can just continue doing what they're doing, pay this guy, and then at some point he's going to leave for sure. Right. I mean, he's not going to stick in the Missouri Valley. The other option is you take the option that Creighton did, and you move your program up to another conference. Because if you're successful, I mean, they've been successful with, this will be 2 straight coaches potentially where they're successful. Now you almost feel like you have like a tradition sort of, momentum. I don't know what sort of they have for donors. I don't know what if they can move up to another, the A10 or something like that. Right. I mean, there are possibilities if you're successful. And so then you maybe will hang on to a guy like McCollum, because now he's suddenly going to be, a high major coach. I don't know. I mean, that's the other option for Drake, I think.
That's the trick. Yes. And it's a hard thing to do, but in the last 20 years, we've seen that done. You've seen, we mentioned Loyola Chicago goes in a hop, skip, and a jump from the Horizon to the Missouri Valley. I mean, they were a peer school of U of D and Oakland not long ago.
Right.
They then hopped from there to the Missouri Valley, and from the Missouri Valley now to the Atlantic 10. Butler's the all-timer. They went from the Horizon to the Big East.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was a jump in between. Creighton went from the Missouri Valley to the Big East. Wichita State went from the Missouri Valley to the American. So you're right. They've lost a lot of those schools, but it's clearly still a play. And I give a great amount of credit to Drake for doing this, and for Indiana State to doing it with Josh Schertz in the same
Yeah.
league, to have the courage to go against the norm and say, nope, we're not going to go get the guy who was the lead assistant at Purdue. No knock
Right.
on Micah Shrewsbury's obviously proven he's a good coach too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right.
we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to go get a guy who has kicked people's asses at the D2 level, because that's a guy that knows how to find players, we think he can find the kind of players who can be successful here,
Yeah.
because we are not going to be able to recruit from the top 100 list.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what, say, a Minnesota, for example, really ought to be looking at this stage of the game. Say, okay, we've tried all these different things. We've tried to bring in Rick Pitino's son, and that didn't work. We tried Tubby Smith, who'd won a national championship, and that kind of worked, but not really, not to the level we thought, at least. Now we've tried a guy who was a well-regarded assistant at Xavier, and Ben Johnson, and that hasn't worked. Why not try a guy who's had to do it and has been successful with guys that other big programs didn't want, and figure that guy maybe knows something that these other guys don't? And that's what you need. That's a reasonable path to success for a lower echelon program in a high major league. But
the challenge for Minnesota may be convincing a guy like that to come to Minnesota, because if they don't have a good NIL situation, he may say,
well,
that's not right.
You got a point. Just because you're offering doesn't mean they're going to accept it.
Yeah.
And sometimes those guys will be patient, but you could never sell it. But honestly, should a Minnesota be thinking, if we're going to extend this out, should a Minnesota be thinking about going and grabbing a D2 coach anyway? Like, for example, the head coach at Ferris State is a very good local example of this.
Yeah, we talked about it before. Yeah.
Ton of success for a long time at that level. Why has a D1 not hired him?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to start, the more of these stories that we see, players and now even coaches, the more the resistance to it is being broken down. And I think I don't know if we're going to see a high major get that bold, but you never know.
You never know. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you start getting competitive leagues where you've got 20 teams, you might need a differentiator. And so that may be what you turn to. So.
That's it. It's a Moneyball type approach. Like, look for the vulnerabilities. Look for the things that your other peer programs in your league are not willing to do, are not looking at, and saying, is there an advantage for us here getting a guy who's used to winning with these? Well, we've seen that example in Big Ten football this year at Indiana, have we not?
Yeah.
So I think it can work. But anyway.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Especially in the era where you can bring players with you. It makes it a lot easier too, especially with basketball. You don't need to bring as many players too.
Well, that's what the Drake equation is. And it's what Indiana.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
No question. All right. So it's this time of year, I usually close the show a little differently, just because it's getting close to Christmas. And as longtime listeners of the show know, our middle son, Andy, passed away when he was 14, right before he started high school in August. And he was a member of the Grand Rapids Choir Men and Boys. We obviously miss him all the time. Right now, he'd be 20 years old. I'm guessing he'd probably be Michigan State, probably studying music. That's sort of, you always kind of envision what life would be like with him. So just as a difference for closing the show, I'm going to close with him. He was a head courser of the Grand Rapids Choir Men and Boys. If you want to check out some choral music, which maybe not a lot of our listeners are into, but if you're in the Grand Rapids area, it's a fantastic organization for young boys to develop. It really changed Andy's life. It was a great community family to be a part of, for our family to have them in our life. You can always check out their stuff at grcmb.org. Also, my wife, Marcy, is a pediatrician, and she has had a podcast for parents who've lost their children called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. If you know someone, or if you are someone who a parent is struggling, or a friend, a colleague, someone who is looking for, hear other voices, she's talked to. She's done over 270 episodes now. She brings one out every week, where she talks to a parent, and they just talk about sort of losing a child and what it's like what they've learned and how they've gotten through it. And just sometimes knowing that other people have been through that is tremendously helpful. And so if you know someone who may benefit from that, It's obviously free. You can find any podcast player as well. So I just encourage you to check that out at called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. You can find the website is andysmom.com. And so we'll close the show with Andy. This is his solo that he sang for the Christmas concert in 2017. So he was 13 at this time. And so we'll close with that. And so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.